Chapter 9. John McNabb had never, in his life, met a kid he couldn't strike out until the runt. Now, as he thought about it, he came to two conclusions. One, he couldn't stand having this blemish on his record. And two, if you beat a kid up, it's the same as striking him out. So McNabb and his pals went looking for the kid. They called themselves the Cobras. Nobody messed with them, at least nobody in the West End. The Cobras had heard that the kid was hanging around the park in the tracks, and that's where they spotted him one Saturday afternoon, on the tracks by the path that had ran from the Oriole Street dead end to the park. He was down by Red Hill and heading away from them, book in hand as usual. But the Cobras just stood there, stunned. "I don't believe it," one Cobra said. "Must be a trick," said another. "I heard about it," said another, "but I didn't believe it." It wasn't a trick, it was true. The kid was running on the rail. McNabb scooped up a handful of track stones. He launched one. He snarled, "He's dead. Let's get him." By the time Maniac looked back, they were almost on him. He wobbled once, leaped from the rail to the ground, and took off. He was at Oriole Street dead end, but his instinct said no, not the street, too much open space, and he stuck with the tracks. Coming into view above him was the house on Raco Hill where he had eaten spaghetti. He could go in there to the whistling mother, the other kids, be safe. They wouldn't follow him in there, would they? Stones clanked off the steel rails. He darted left, skirting the dump, wove through the miniature mountain range of stone piles and into the trees, skiing on his heels, down the steep bank and into the creek. Frogs plopping, no time to look for stepping rocks. Yells behind him now, war whoops, stones pelting the water, stinging his back. The other side, through the trees and picker bushes, past the army jeeps and out the park boulevard, past the Italian restaurant on the corner, the bakery, screeching tires, row houses, streets, alleys, cars, porches, windows, faces, staring faces, the town, whizzing past Maniac, a blur of faces, each face staring from his own window, each face in its own personal frame, its own house, its own address. Some place to be when there was nowhere else to be. How lucky to be a face staring out from a window. And then could it be? The voices behind him were growing faint. He slowed. He turned. He stopped. They were lined up at the street a block back. They were still yelling and shaking their fists, but they weren't moving off the curb. And now they were laughing. Why were they laughing? The Cobras were standing at Hector Street. Hector Street was the boundary between the East and the West End. Or, to put it another way, between the blacks and the whites. Not that you never saw a white in the East End or a black person in the West End. People did cross the line now and then, especially if they were adults and it was daylight. But nighttime, forget it. And if you were a kid, day or night, forget it. Unless you had business on the other side, just as sports teams or schools. But don't just go strolling along as if you belonged there. As if you weren't afraid. As if you didn't notice you were a different color from everyone around you. The Cobras were laughing because they figured the dumb, scraggly runt would get out of the East End in just about as good a shape as a bare toe in a convention of snapping turtles. Chapter 10. Of course, Maniac didn't know any of that. He was simply glad the chase was over. He turned and started walking, catching his breath. East Chestnut, East Marshall, Green Street, Arch Street. He had been around here before, the first day with a girl named Amanda, other days jogging through. But this was a Saturday, not a school day, and there was something different about the streets. Kids all over. One of them jumped down on the front step and planted himself right in front of Maniac. Maniac had to jerk to a stop to keep from plowing into the kid. Even so, their noses were practically touching. Maniac blinked and stepped back. The kid stepped forward. Each time Maniac stepped back, the kid stepped forward. They traveled practically half a block that way. Finally, Maniac turned and started walking. The kid jumped around and plunked himself in front. He bit a chunk off of a candy bar he was holding. "Where you going?" he said. Candy bar flakes flew from his mouth. "I'm looking for Sycamore Street," said Maniac. "Do you know where it is?" "Yeah, I know where it is." Maniac waited, but the kid said nothing more. "Well, do you think you could tell me where it is?" Stone was softer than the kid's glare. "No." Maniac looked around. Other kids had stopped playing and they were staring. Someone called, "Do 'em in, Mars Bar." Someone else, "Waste 'em." The kid, as you probably guessed by now, was none other than Mars Bar Thompson. Mars Bar heard the calls and the stone got harder. Then suddenly he stopped glaring. Suddenly he was smiling. He held up the candy bar an inch from Maniac's lips. "Want a bite?" Maniac couldn't figure. "You sure?" "Yeah, go ahead, take a bite." Maniac shrugged, took the Mars Bar, bit off a chunk and handed it back. "Thanks." Dead silence along the street. The kid had done the unthinkable. He had chomped on one of Mars Bar's own bars. Not only that, but a white kid just put his mouth where black kids had put theirs. Be it soda bottles, spoons, or candy bars, it just didn't happen. And the kid hadn't even gone for the unused end. He chomped right over Mars Bar's own marks. Mars Bar was confused. Who was this kid? What was this kid? As usual, when Mars Bar got confused, he got mad. He thumped Maniac in the chest. You think you bad or something? Maniac, who was now twice as confused, blinked. Huh? You think you come down here and be bad? What you think? Mars Bar was practically shouting now. No, said Maniac, I don't think I'm bad. I'm not saying I'm an angel either. Not even really good. Somewhere in between, I guess. Mars Bar jammed his arms downward, stuck out his chin, and sneered. Am I bad? Maniac was befuddled. I don't know. 1 minute you're yelling at me, the next minute you're giving me a bite of your candy bar. The chin jutted out more. Tell me I'm bad. Maniac didn't answer. Flies stopped buzzing. I said, tell me I'm bad. Maniac blinked and he shrugged. It's none of my business. If you're bad, let your mother or father tell you. Now it was Mars Bar doing the blinking. After a while, he looked down. What's that? Before Maniac answered a book, Mars Bar had snatched it from his hand. This ain't yours, he said. Looks like mine. It's somebody else's. It's mine, I'm keeping it. With rattlesnake speed, Maniac snatched the book back, except for one page, which stayed ripped in Mars Bar's hand. Give me the page, said Maniac. Take it, Fishbelly. Silence, eyes. The flies were waiting. East End vultures. Suddenly, neither kid could see the other because a broom came down like a straw curtain between their faces and a voice said, I'll take it. It was the lady from the nearest house, out to sweep her steps. She lowered the broom, but it kept between them. Better yet, she said to Mars Bar, give it back to him. Mars Bar glared at her. There wasn't an 11-year-old in the East End who could stand up to Mars Bar's glare. In the West End, even high schoolers were known to crumble under the glare. To old ladies on both sides of the street, it was all but fatal. And when Mars Bar stepped off a curb and combined the glare with his super slow stride dipped shuffle step, well, it was said he could back traffic all the way up to Bridgeport while he took 10 minutes to cross the street. But not this time. This time, Mars Bar was up against an East End lady in her prime, and she was matching him eyeball for eyeball. And when it was over, only one glare was left standing, and it wasn't Mars Bar's. Mars Bar handed the torn page back, but not before he crumbled it into a ball. The broom pushed away, turned him around, and swept him up the street. The lady looked down at Maniac. A little of the glare lingered in her eye. You better get on, boy, where you belong. I can't be following you around. I got things to do. Maniac just stood there a minute. There was something he felt like doing, and maybe he would have, but the lady turned and went back to her house and shut the door. So he walked away. Chapter 11. Now what? Maniac uncrumpled the page, flattened it as best as he could. How could he return the book to Amanda in this condition? He couldn't, but he had to. It was hers. Judging from that morning, she was pretty finicky about her books. What would make her madder, not to get the book back at all or to get it back with a ripped page? Maniac cringed at both possibilities. He wandered around the East End, jogging slowly, in no hurry now to find 278 Sycamore Street. He was passing a vacant lot when he heard an all-too-familiar voice. Hey, Fishbelly! He stopped and turned. This time Mars Bar wasn't alone. A handful of other kids trailed him down the sidewalk. Maniac waited. Coming up to him, Mars Bar said, Where you running, boy? Nowhere. You running from us? You afraid? No, I just like to run. You want to run? Go ahead, we'll give you a head start. Maniac grinned. No, thanks. Mars Bar held out his hand. Give me my book. Maniac shook his head. Mars Bar glared. Give me it. Maniac shook his head. Mars Bar reached for it. Maniac pulled it back. They moved in on him now. They backed him up. Some high schoolers were playing basketball up on the street that they weren't noticing, and there wasn't a broom-swinging lady in sight. Maniac felt a hard flatness against his back. Suddenly, his world was very small and very simple. A brick wall behind him, a row of scowling faces in front of him. He clutched the book with both hands. The faces were closing in. A voice called, That you, Jeffrey? The faces parted. At the curb was a girl on a bike. Amanda! She hoisted the bike to the sidewalk and walked it over. She looked at the book, at the torn page. Who ripped my book? Mars Bar pointed at Maniac. He did. Amanda knew better. You ripped my book. Mars Bar's eyes went big as headlights. I did not. You did, you liar. I didn't. You did. She let the bike fall to Maniac. She grabbed the book and started kicking Mars Bar in his beloved sneakers. I got a little brother. and a little sister that crayon all over my books, and I got a dog that eats them and poops on them, and that's just inside my own family, and I'm not gonna have anybody messing with my books. Do you understand? By then, Mars Bar was hauling on up the street past the basketball players who were rolling on the asphalt with laughter. Amanda took the torn page from Maniac. To her, it was a broken wing of a bird, a pet out in the rain. She turned misty-eyed to Maniac. It's one of my favorite pages. Maniac smiled. We can fix it. The way he said it, she believed. Want to come to my house, she said. Sure, he said.